Imagine a woman so powerful that an entire nuclear-armed regime trembled at the mere mention of her name. For 27 years, she was the face of a revolution while her husband was locked in a tiny cell. Yet, history tried to erase her, painting her as a villain instead of a victim. Was she the mother of the nation or a dangerous radical? Today, we peel back the layers of propaganda to reveal the true, unfiltered spirit of Winnie Madikizela-Mandela. Born Nomzamo in the lush green hills of Bizana, her name literally translated to "she who undergoes trials." It was a prophecy etched into her soul from birth. In the rural Pondo Kingdom, she learned the strength of her ancestors before moving to the concrete jungle of Johannesburg. She wasn't just a beauty, she was the city's first black medical social worker. Little did she know, her life was about to collide with a destiny that would shake the entire world forever. The meeting happened at a bus stop, a chance encounter that felt like a lightning strike. Nelson was a charismatic lawyer and a rising star in the liberation movement. He saw in her a fire that matched his own. Their romance was a whirlwind, a brief moment of domestic bliss before the shadow of the state fell upon them. They were a revolutionary power couple, but the apartheid government was already plotting to tear their young family apart and silence them. The 1962 arrest of Nelson Mandela changed everything. Suddenly, the young mother of two was left alone to face the full might of a racist police state. The authorities didn't just want to stop him, they wanted to break her. They raided her home at dawn, terrorized her children, and placed her under constant surveillance. She refused to hide. Instead, she stepped into the spotlight, becoming the living symbol of the struggle while her husband sat behind bars in silence. In 1969, the state's cruelty reached a breaking point. Winnie was snatched from her bed and thrown into solitary confinement for 491 days. She was kept in a tiny, cold cell with no human contact, subjected to relentless interrogation and psychological torture. Most would have crumbled, but she emerged from that darkness with a heart of steel. The woman who walked into that prison was a social worker, the woman who walked out was a hardened revolutionary commander of the people. Fearing her influence in the townships, the regime banished her to Brandfort, a desolate, dusty town far from her supporters. They hoped she would fade into obscurity. They were wrong. She transformed her place of exile into a hub of community activism, setting up clinics and soup kitchens for the local poor. She turned a prison town into a fortress of resistance, proving that you could exile a person, but you could never exile a powerful idea or a mother's love. As the 1976 Soweto uprising turned the streets into a war zone, Winnie's presence was felt in every heartbeat of the youth. She became the mother of the revolution, comforting the bereaved and fueling the fires of defiance. The children of Soweto looked to her for courage as they faced armored vehicles with nothing but stones. She wasn't just a political figure anymore, she was the soul of the resistance, a woman the state simply could not kill or silence. By the mid-1980s, South Africa was burning. The state's violence had reached a fever pitch, and Winnie's rhetoric shifted to match the brutality of the times. She famously spoke of liberation through matches and necklaces, a reference to the horrific practice of burning informers. This period remains the most controversial chapter of her life. Was she a monster created by the system, or a leader forced to use the only language the brutal apartheid regime could understand at that bloody time? She surrounded herself with a group of bodyguards known as the Mandela United Football Club. What started as a protection detail soon descended into a reign of terror within the township. Rumors of kidnappings and assaults began to circulate, tarnishing her once sterling reputation. The liberation movement was torn between loyalty to their icon and the horrific reports emerging from her home. The line between hero and vigilante was blurring, threatening to consume everything she had worked for during her entire life. The lowest point came with the death of 14-year-old Stompie Moeketsi, a young activist allegedly kidnapped and murdered by her bodyguards. The scandal sent shockwaves through the global anti-apartheid movement. Winnie was charged and convicted of kidnapping, though she denied any involvement in the killing. The international community, which had once worshipped her, began to distance itself. She was now a woman under fire, not from the state, but from within the very movement she helped to build. In 1990, the world watched as Nelson Mandela finally walked free after 27 years. Beside him, holding his hand, was Winnie. It was a moment of supreme triumph, but behind the smiles, the marriage was crumbling. The decades of separation and the trauma of their individual battles had created a chasm too wide to bridge. They were the king and queen of a new nation, but their private kingdom was in ruins, a casualty of the very war they won. The legal separation and subsequent divorce in the mid-1990s was a public tragedy. Nelson spoke of her loneliness and the betrayal he felt, while Winnie remained a figure of quiet, stony defiance. She was stripped of her titles within the new government, sidelined by the men who were now in power. Many saw her as a liability to the new Rainbow Nation, a reminder of a violent past that the leaders were desperate to leave behind in the new era. During the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings, Winnie was confronted by the mothers of those who had suffered at the hands of her football club. Archbishop Desmond Tutu pleaded with her to apologize, to admit that things had gone horribly wrong. Her reluctant, partial apology remains one of the most debated moments in South African history. Was she sorry for the pain, or simply sorry she had been caught in the crosshairs of a changing and unforgiving political landscape? Despite the scandals, Winnie never lost her connection to the grassroots. While other leaders moved into suburban mansions, she remained in Soweto, close to the people who still called her Mama. She became a fierce critic of the post-apartheid government, accusing them of forgetting the poor and selling out the revolution. To the elites, she was a problem. To the disenfranchised youth, she was the only leader who still spoke their truth with unapologetic fire and raw honesty. For years, Western media and the apartheid-era archives painted a one-dimensional picture of Winnie. She was labeled a Lady Macbeth, a woman who had gone mad with power and bloodlust. This narrative conveniently ignored the decades of state-sponsored psychological warfare waged against her. It ignored the fact that she was a woman fighting a war alone while the men were safely tucked away in prison. The world needed a villain, and Winnie Madikizela-Mandela was the perfect candidate for that dark role. A new documentary, highlighted by the South African Jewish Report, seeks to correct the record. It brings Winnie alive for future generations by using her own voice and unseen footage. This film challenges the official history, showing the strategic brilliance and the immense suffering of a woman who was the true architect of the internal resistance. It asks us to look past the headlines and see the human being who was forged in the fire of the world's most racist system. Winnie's story is also the story of thousands of Black South African women whose contributions were erased by patriarchal history. While men were often the faces of the movement, women were the ones holding families together, organizing boycotts, and facing down police dogs in the streets. Winnie became their proxy, their fierce representative. By reclaiming her story, we are reclaiming the history of an entire gender that fought, bled, and died for a freedom they were often denied in the end. What does it do to a human soul to be constantly watched, bound, and beaten? Winnie's life was a testament to the high price of political conviction. She lost her youth, her marriage, and her privacy to the cause of liberation. The documentary explores the psychological toll of her journey, revealing the scars that never fully healed. She was a mother who had to teach her children how to survive a raid before she taught them how to ride a bicycle. Across the African diaspora, Winnie remains a towering figure of Black resistance. From New York to London to Lagos, her image adorns murals and her name is invoked in songs of liberation. She represented a refusal to be broken, a refusal to be polite in the face of genocide. For many, she was more relatable than Nelson. She was the one who stayed in the trenches, the one who didn't compromise with the masters of the old, cruel world. In her final years, Winnie became an elder stateswoman, though she never lost her sharp tongue. She remained a fixture in South African politics, often seen in her signature colorful turbans and elegant gowns. Even as her health declined, her presence at any event would electrify the room. She was the grandmother of the nation, a title she wore with a mixture of pride and weariness, knowing that the battle for true economic equality was far from over for her people. When Winnie Madikizela-Mandela passed away in 2018, the world stopped to take notice. Her funeral was not just a burial, it was a final, massive political rally. Thousands filled the stadium, chanting her name and celebrating her life. It was a moment of national reckoning, where even her fiercest critics had to acknowledge her indomitable spirit. She died as she lived, surrounded by the love of the common people and the respect of the world she helped to change forever. The documentary unearths archival footage that shows her in moments of quiet reflection and strategic planning. We see her not as the caricature of a mad woman, but as a sophisticated political operative who understood the power of optics and the necessity of defiance. These images bring her alive, stripping away the layers of dust that time and bias have settled upon her legacy. We are finally seeing the woman as she truly was, in all her complex and messy glory. For future generations, Winnie's life serves as a blueprint for resistance. Her story teaches us that freedom is never given, it is taken through relentless struggle and sacrifice. She reminds us that even the most powerful regimes have a breaking point, and that one person's courage can ignite a fire that burns down a system of oppression. The documentary ensures that her name will not be a footnote in history, but a roaring anthem for anyone fighting for justice today. Winnie Madikizela-Mandela was a woman of contradictions, a saint to some, a sinner to others, but a hero to millions. She was the fire that the apartheid state couldn't extinguish and the voice that the world couldn't ignore. As we look back on her life, we must ask ourselves, would the South Africa we know today even exist without her? Her legacy is a mirror reflecting our own capacity for resilience. She is gone, but the mother of the nation lives on.